Former President George W. Bush said to be putting his 2 cents in the race for the White House, reportedly unloading on Senator Ted Cruz over the weekend. One person at an event for donors telling Politico.com, President Bush said, quote, "I just don't like the guy." He said he found it opportunistic that Cruz was sucking up to Trump and just expecting all of his support to come to him in the end. The tenor of what he said about the other candidates was really pretty pleasant until he got to Cruz, end quote. Karl Rove, a former senior advisor, deputy chief of staff to President Bush, and a Fox News contributor. And Karl, good morning to you.
Morning, Hammer.
So some bad blood we need to know about this, Rove?
Well, first of all, this is, from one person at an event, and neither you or I were there. I do know that President Bush has expressed some, on a number of occasions, a little bit of astonishment as to the attacks that Ted made on him. For example, went out of his way to attack his appointment of John Roberts to the Supreme Court and his father's appointment of David Souter to the Supreme Court. And yet, at the time of the appointment of John Roberts, Ted Cruz was a personal friend of John Roberts, wrote a strongly positive piece about him, emphasizing his personal friendship and his knowledge, said that both John Roberts and the man who appointed him, George W. Bush, were strong, dependable conservatives, and yet then turned around and, for political purposes, attacked 43 and 41 for appointing, bad people to the Supreme Court, but didn't say a single word about Ronald Reagan appointing Justice Kennedy and Justice O'Connor, who on many occasions over the years disappointed conservatives. So he thought it was a little opportunistic and wondered why he was going out of his way to sort of pick
interesting.
it. Rather than making a principled case of, look, the presidents have appointed judges who've turned out to be wrong, I won't be that way. He took two men whose last name was Bush and said they each appointed a bad person, and then was quiet about somebody who'd appointed two people.
I think what's significant about that, Cruz has argued 9 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. That's right in his wheelhouse. He wrote a book in Writ 43 on his record, his foreign policy, arguments against bigger government, new entitlement programs.
Well, let's take that for just a moment. Let's take that just for a moment. He attacked him on spending. President Bush had the spending to GDP ratio, which is a way to look at the overall size of the government, was 19.6% during the Bush years, despite the fact we had a war and major disasters, and that is lower than the post-World War II average. The deficits ran 2% of GDP. President Obama, his deficits have been running more than twice that much. The debt was, over the course of the Bush years, was 36%, equal to 36% of GDP. Today it's 74% of GDP. So, President Bush came into office, took discretionary domestic spending, cut its growth rate in half in his first budget, cut it in half again, cut it again his third year, and then flatlined it less than inflation for the remaining 4 years of his term in office. And yet Cruz comes out and attacks him.
We can relitigate all that, but I really want, let's move it forward. By the way, Freddie Ford said he does not view Senator Cruz as Mr. Governor Bush's most serious rival. And this is what Cruz said.
I know that for a fact.
It's no surprise.
That's true for a fact. He's told me who he thinks his biggest rival is, but I'm not saying who it is. Well, I'm not saying who it is. It's just not Ted Cruz.
Is it Trump?
I'm just not saying. I'm just saying that Freddie Ford is right. That's not the president's view. He's told me on a number of
This is what
occasions
Cruz said, just for the record. It's no surprise that President Bush is supporting his brother and attacking the candidates he believes pose a threat to his campaign. I have no intention of reciprocating. I met my wife Heidi working in his campaign, so I will always be grateful to him. There's also a suggestion that 43 is not happy with Cruz because he's sucking up to Trump. Is there truth to that?
Well, first of all, let me say I think that's generous of Ted to say he's not going to reciprocate. I wondered what he did when he launched a set of unprovoked attacks on President Bush over Justice Roberts and over spending. So I'm glad he won't reciprocate, and I'm glad he met his wife during the campaign. I wish he had that same sense of generosity before he began to attack the president gratuitously.
Is he bruised about the Trump attacks on his record and, in turn, his brother Jeb?
Well, look, President Bush is mystified. I think that's the right word to say, that Donald Trump, here's a guy who called for the impeachment of President George W. Bush, criticized Nancy Pelosi in 2007 for not doing enough to remove the Republican president from office. And so, yeah, I think there's a little bit of mystification in Dallas as to, Donald Trump's conservative credentials and here's a guy who says Bush was responsible for 9/11. He repeats statements that are simply not true. He says Bush lied about the presence of WMD in Iraq. That is an absolute lie. He says George Tenet knew about the attack in advance. He said that Saturday in the Washington Post. That is simply not true. Yeah. And now he's saying, well, I knew that the attack was coming because I wrote about it in my book. Look, after the Al-Qaeda was the master, Al-Qaeda was behind the first attack on the World Trade Center. Al-Qaeda was behind the attack on the embassies in East Africa. Al-Qaeda was behind the attack on the USS Cole. Al-Qaeda was behind the attack on Black Hawk Down. They trained those fighters. We, of course, knew on day one of the Bush administration that Al-Qaeda was a threat to the United States. But again, as several congressional reviews have done and an outside commission, no actionable intelligence that told us they were coming on 9/11.
It's a big, important topic. I didn't want to cut you off, but the computer's going to cut me off if I don't stop now. To be continued. Thank you, Karl Rove. Live there in Austin. You got it.